The second Jim Tanner slid that flimsy piece of paper across the desk, I knew it was bad. I didn't expect that bad. A senior mechanic with 15 years in his shop, and he was cutting my pay by 20%. Like it was a casual adjustment, not a gut punch. "Jason, you know I value you," Jim said, leaning back in his leather chair like some corporate big shot. "But times are tough, and everyone's got to do their part." I kept my hands still on the desk, refusing to fold the paper. "Times are tough," I repeated. My voice was calm, but my brain was racing through the years I'd kept this place running, while Jim strutted around taking credit. He smiled, that smug smile he always used when he thought he was being reasonable. "You're still getting more than most guys in the industry. I'm sure you understand." Understand? I understood plenty. I understood how many jobs I'd saved after Jim botched the initial diagnosis. I understood how much business came from customers who'd only let me touch their cars. And I understood that Jim Tanner had never so much as held a wrench in his life. "You're the backbone here, Jason," he went on. "That's why I need you on board with this. We'll weather the storm." "Right," I said, sliding the paper back to him. "Storms don't usually come with you keeping the office bonus while the shop guys take the hit." His smile twitched, but he didn't rise to it. "Think about the big picture." I stood up. "I have been." The second I stepped out of his office, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Jason, this is Karen Wilkes." I knew the name immediately. Owner of Wilkes Automotive, the place even other mechanics respected. "I've heard you're not exactly happy where you are," she said. Her tone was steady, businesslike, but there was an edge to it. "I've been looking for someone to run the shop floor, not as an employee, as a partner." I leaned against the tool chest, watching Jim through the glass as he talked to a customer, grinning like he'd just saved the day. "A partner? You'd have a say in everything," Karen said. "Hiring, training, the work itself. I'm not looking for another body. I'm looking for someone who can grow this with me." I didn't answer right away. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed level. "That's a big offer." "It's a good one," she said. "You don't have to decide right now, but you should know. I'm talking to you first because your reputation speaks for itself." We wrapped up the call, and I slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked around at the bay, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air, the same place I'd poured years of my life into. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Jim had said, every smirk he'd given over the years, every time he'd signed his name to my work. By morning, I already knew what I was going to do. I just had to pick the right moment. The next day, I walked into the shop, fired up my computer, and sent Karen a simple email. "I'm in." The email to Karen was barely sent when the noise of the shop dragged me back into the grind. Air tools whining, a radio humming from the corner, the smell of coolant and grease clinging to everything. I'd worked in this chaos for so long it felt like home, but lately it was a home with a cracked foundation. Jim's leadership was like watching someone try to drive with the parking brake on. Every decision cost us time, money, or both. He'd chase the cheapest parts, ignore the service schedules, and then wonder why cars kept coming back with the same problems. I'd stopped counting how many jobs I'd quietly redone after hours just to keep customers from walking. The crew noticed, but nobody spoke up. Most of them had families, bills stacked high. They weren't going to risk crossing Jim. The real kicker was how he thought all this was fine. Last month, he'd told Mrs. Ellison her brake issue was handled after he'd slapped on some bargain rotors without checking the calipers. She came back 2 days later with the same grinding noise. Jim wasn't around, so I pulled it apart myself. Caliper seized solid, I fixed it, called her personally, and sent her off with the car actually safe to drive. 2 days after that, Jim strutted into the break room, bragging about how he had saved the day. "Customer loyalty, boys," he'd said, smirking like he'd taught a master class. I kept my mouth shut, but my hands were balled into fists under the table. It was like that all the time. My work, his credit, my relationships, his bottom line. By mid-afternoon, I was elbow deep in a timing belt job, sweat dripping down my back, when I caught sight of him through the bay doors, standing with a clipboard, nodding along to a supplier rep like he was running some high-end dealership. I knew that supplier. We'd gotten rush orders from him for years because I'd built the trust. Jim couldn't name half the guys in their warehouse, but he'd still slap his name on the order forms. I felt it then, that slow burn in my gut I'd been ignoring for months. I wasn't a mechanic here anymore. I was a servant propping up someone else's ego. One of the younger techs, Robbie, came over. "Hey, boss wants to know if you can stay late. He's got a customer coming in with a VIP job." "Yeah?" I wiped my hands and stared toward the office. Let him handle it. Sounds like his area of expertise. Robbie chuckled, but I didn't. Because this wasn't just irritation anymore, it was clarity. I had skills Jim couldn't buy and relationships he couldn't fake, and I wasn't about to hand them over to him forever. That night, after locking up, I sat in my truck with the engine idling and started a list in my notebook. Contacts, key customers, suppliers who actually answered my calls, every detail that made this shop run. By the time I shut the truck off, the page was half full. I wasn't just thinking about leaving anymore. I was building the exit so clean, Jim wouldn't see it coming until I was already gone. By Monday morning, the list in my notebook had grown into a full plan. Contacts, accounts, everything I'd need once I walked out of here for good. All that was left was making it official. I typed the resignation letter at my desk before the bays opened. 2 weeks' notice, professional tone, not a single word about the real reason I was leaving. I printed it, signed it, and walked straight into Jim's office. He looked up from his monitor, confused. "What's this?" "My notice," I said, setting the paper on his desk. His brow lifted, then he forced a smile. "Jason, come on, you're overreacting. If this is about the pay cut, we can talk. I can work something out. Promotion, maybe even a raise down the road." I kept my hands in my pockets. "It's not about that." "Then what is it?" he pressed. "I'm moving on," I said, flat. He leaned back, trying for casual, but not pulling it off. "You know, the industry's small. You don't want to burn bridges." I met his eyes. "Then it's a good thing I'm leaving the bridge standing." That got a twitch out of him. "Fine, but I expect you to wrap things up and not poach my customers." I didn't bother answering. I just left his office and started packing my drawer, my notebooks, a few personal tools, the mug that had been on my bench for years. By midday, he'd shifted from fake charm to quiet hostility. He lingered in the bays, watching me, tossing out little jabs. "Hope you land somewhere that'll actually put up with your independence." I ignored him. My relationships with the customers weren't built on his approval, and we both knew it. As I loaded the last box into my truck at the end of the day, he came out to the lot. "You're making a mistake, Jason. Out there, you're just another wrench turner. Here, you had a name." I closed the tailgate. "Funny, I thought it was your name on everything I did." He didn't answer. I got in the truck, started it up, and pulled toward the street. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me. A text from Dave Willis, one of my oldest clients. "Heard you're leaving? I've got a job for you if you're up for it." I smiled as the shop disappeared in the rear view. I wasn't walking into uncertainty. I was driving straight into demand. Karen handed me the keys her first morning, back from a meeting. "It's yours now, Jason. I'll deal with the business end. You make this place run." I stepped into the shop bay, already seeing a dozen things Jim would have called good enough, that I knew were slowing the crew down. Within the first week, we reorganized the workstations, updated the scheduling system, and got rid of those cheap knockoff parts Jim loved so much. "Feels like we can actually breathe in here," said Marco, one of the techs Karen had kept on. "That's the point," I told him. "We work smarter, we keep the customers happy, and the rest takes care of itself." And it did. Jobs went out faster, comebacks dropped to near zero, and every customer left knowing exactly who'd worked on their car. I didn't need to take credit. They gave it freely. A couple of weeks in, I heard the familiar sound of a diesel pickup outside. Dave Willis climbed down from the cab with that big grin of his. "Didn't think I'd see you under a different roof, Jason," he said. "Better roof," I replied, shaking his hand. He didn't waste time. "I've got 3 trucks in my fleet that need servicing. You up for it?" "Always." Word spread quick. Within a month, I'd seen half a dozen old clients walk through the door. They'd shake their heads, muttering about the mess Jim was making back at the old place. I didn't ask questions. I didn't have to. Karen noticed the shift too. "You weren't kidding about your customer base," she said one afternoon, flipping through the week's appointments. "They'd follow you anywhere." "That's because I don't feed them excuses," I said. Business kept climbing, and so did morale. The crew knew they could take their time to do it right without a manager breathing down their necks about labor hours. Our parts suppliers started giving us priority again because they knew we paid on time and didn't cut corners. But every time I heard another satisfied customer say, "Glad to have you back," I couldn't help picturing Jim, scrambling to keep his place afloat. I hadn't seen him since the day I left, but I knew him well enough to imagine the forced smile, the fake confidence, the slow panic creeping in. Late one Thursday, my phone buzzed. The caller ID made me pause. Dave Willis again. I'd just finished his last job. "Jason," he said, voice low, "things are bad over there. They messed up another job, and now the guy's threatening to sue. Jim's acting like it's all under control, but trust me, it's not." I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the shop in the background. Sounds like he's finally getting what he's been asking for. Dave chuckled, but it was the tired kind. "If I were you, I'd be ready. Folks are about to come knocking." Dave's warning turned out to be an understatement. Within a week, I started hearing it from every corner. Customers walking in shaking their heads, telling me how disorganized the old shop had become. "They had my car for 4 days," one guy grumbled, arms crossed. "Finally got it back, and the problem was still there. You know who I asked for? You. They said you were no longer with the company. Like I didn't already know where you went." It wasn't just customers. Vendors I'd dealt with for years started calling me instead of Jim. "Hey Jason," one supplier said over the phone, "figured I'd offer you this discount before I run it by Tanner. He's been slow to pay, and honestly, I'd rather deal with someone who actually answers their calls." It hit me then just how deep my network ran. I'd been the face of that shop for so long, most people never even bothered talking to Jim unless they had to. The awkward part came when I started bumping into old co-workers. I ran into Robbie at the gas station one morning. He looked beat. "Man, it's a mess in there," he said, leaning against his car. "Jobs are stacking up, parts orders are wrong half the time, and Tanner's blaming everyone but himself." I nodded, but kept my tone neutral. "You thinking about leaving?" He shrugged. "A couple of us are, but, you know." "Yeah, I know." I wasn't about to start poaching. If they wanted out, they'd have to make that call themselves. Back at our shop, business kept climbing. Every time I thought the rush might slow, another familiar name popped up on the schedule. It wasn't all sunshine. We still had deadlines, warranty claims, and the usual headaches. But at least here, the problems got solved instead of ignored. One afternoon, I got a call from one of the bigger fleet clients I'd worked with back at Jim's. The guy sounded tense. "Jason, I need to ask you something straight," he said. "If I cancel our contract with Tanner, can you take on the work?" "That's a lot of vehicles," I said. "You sure you want to pull the plug like that?" "Let's just say I've been paying for a service I'm not getting. Last month, 3 of our trucks went down for the same issue after they supposedly fixed it. I can't keep bleeding money just to give him a chance to figure it out." I leaned back in my chair, glancing toward the bays where the crew was knocking out another busy day. "If you send them here, they'll be fixed right the first time." That's what I needed to hear. When I hung up, I sat there for a minute, letting it sink in. Jim wasn't just losing jobs, he was losing the contracts that kept his lights on. And from the way the calls were picking up, this was only the start. The week after that fleet client pulled their contract, Jim came unglued. I started hearing from people around town that he was pacing the shop floor, barking orders, and snapping at anyone who so much as asked a question. One morning, Robbie called me from the old shop's parking lot. "You're not going to believe this. Tanner's telling customers you've been calling around trying to steal their business." I laughed into the phone. "And they believe him?" "Not a single one," Robbie said. "They're walking right past him and asking where you are." By then, we were swamped at Karen's. The phone didn't stop ringing. Clients I hadn't heard from in years were booking work. Transmissions, fleet maintenance, full restorations. Some even admitted they'd been sitting on repairs, waiting until they could get to me. We signed 2 new contracts with commercial accounts that month. Karen looked at the numbers and shook her head. "If this keeps up, we'll need more bays." And it kept up. Every time Jim lost a client, the odds were good. They'd be in my shop within the week. One afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was Mark, a longtime client who ran a small delivery company. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Jim just called me, swearing you stole my account. Said if I didn't stick with him, he'd take legal action." I leaned against the workbench. "You told him where to shove it, right?" "Of course," Mark said. "Told him it's my choice where my trucks go. But you should know." He sounded desperate. Desperate was putting it lightly. Word going around was that he'd cut hours for the techs still hanging on, and the parts shelves were half empty because suppliers weren't extending him credit anymore. Robbie stopped by our shop one Saturday morning. He looked around like he was visiting a different planet. Man, this place is alive. Over there, it's a ghost town. Tanner's trying to save money by raising prices, and all it's doing is driving more people out the door. I shook my head. Guess he never learned the difference between profit and greed. You could buy him out for pennies right now, Robbie said with a half smile. Not interested, I told him. I don't want his mess anywhere near here. Still, I kept tabs on the old place. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the pattern was so obvious now. Without me there to hold it together, it was unraveling faster than even I expected. By the end of the month, another vendor called, asking if we could take over a service contract Jim had been botching for months. Everything he touches lately turns into a callback, the guy said. You're the only one I trust to handle this without a circus. Send it over, I told him. When I hung up, Karen was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. You realize he's not coming back from this, right? I nodded. He's doing the damage all by himself. And I meant it. I wasn't out there twisting the knife. I was too busy keeping our own operation moving. Jim's final attempt to stop the bleeding hit the rumor mill 2 days later. He'd hiked prices across the board, telling customers it was a necessary step to ensure quality. The quality hadn't improved, but the walkouts had. By the weekend, I heard he was down to 2 techs, neither of them certified. The collapse wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. The industry expo was buzzing. Rows of booths, the smell of coffee, the hum of sales pitches bouncing off the walls. I was halfway through talking to a parts rep when I heard my name barked across the aisle. Jason! I turned, and there was Jim Tanner, marching toward me like he owned the place. His shirt collar was wrinkled, tie loose, eyes darting at the people turning to watch. You think you're clever? He started, voice loud enough for half the room to hear. You walk out, you gut my business, and then you stand here like nothing happened? I stayed where I was, hands in my pockets. Jim, you're a snake, he snapped. You took my clients, my vendors. You sabotaged me. A few people had stopped pretending not to listen. I could see faces from both old suppliers and shop owners I'd known for years. I kept my tone even. You didn't lose your business because of me. You lost it because you didn't know how to run it. That hit. His face flushed red, but he kept going. I built that shop. You inherited a sign over the door, I said. The rest of it? That was my work. You didn't keep it alive. You bled it dry. The circle of listeners grew tighter. Someone whispered behind me, and a few others just folded their arms, waiting to see what happened next. Jim jabbed a finger toward me. You're gonna regret this. No, I said, still calm. I'm gonna go back to my shop and keep doing my job. You should try that. For a moment, the only sound was the buzz of the expo floor. Then one of the older shop owners stepped forward, giving Jim a look I'd seen 100 times in the bays when a customer caught him lying. Maybe it's time you stop blaming other people, the guy said. That landed harder than anything I'd said. Jim's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced around at the faces, none of them sympathetic, and straightened his tie like it was going to fix something. I've got work to do, I said, breaking the silence. I turned back toward my conversation with the parts rep. Behind me, the crowd started to drift away. A few shook their heads. Jim didn't follow. He just stood there, small in the middle of the aisle, looking like he'd just figured out the truth he'd been avoiding. I didn't need to gloat. His humiliation was doing the job for me. 6 months later, the shop felt like a different world. We'd doubled our client list, the bays were booked out weeks in advance, and Karen was already talking about opening a second location. I still worked the floor most days, but I spent just as much time making decisions that actually shaped the business. One Thursday morning, I was going over the schedule when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Jason Miller, a deep voice asked. That's me. This is Tom Garrison, Regional Director for North Point Auto Supply. I've been following your work since you left Tanner's place. We're looking for a repair partner to pilot a new program. Distribution discounts, national marketing, the works. Your name keeps coming up. I leaned back in my chair. What exactly are you offering? A partnership, he said. Not just supplying parts. We want to feature your shop as a model operation in our network. That means expansion, equipment upgrades, and exclusive contracts. It took a second to sink in. I'd gone from being the guy who got his paycheck cut without warning to the guy they wanted representing a national brand. Let's set up a meeting, I said. After I hung up, Karen was leaning against the doorway, eyebrow raised. Good news? You could say that, I told her, filling her in. She grinned. Told you people would notice. They had. My name was showing up in trade publications. I'd been invited to speak at a regional mechanics conference, and suppliers treated us like we were their top account. Meanwhile, Jim was barely a ghost in the industry. I'd heard through a parts rep that he'd sold what was left of his shop to a bigger chain and tried to manage one of their locations. That lasted 3 months before they mutually agreed to part ways. A month ago, an industry insider told me flat out, Jim Tanner's done. He couldn't manage a tire rotation if you handed him the lug wrench. I didn't waste a second thinking about him. Now, with North Point's offer on the table, the future wasn't just about keeping the shop running. It was about growing it into something bigger than I ever imagined when I first picked up a wrench. Karen came over, coffee in hand. So, are we doing this? I looked out at the bays, crew working in sync, customers smiling, the hum of a shop that actually ran the way it should. Yeah, I said. We're doing this. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I answered. Jason Miller, we heard you might be expanding. We want to talk investment. I smiled. Doors weren't just opening, they were wide open, and I was walking through every single one.